Hello and welcome to Money Trail with me, Amir Arafat. Today, the American taxpayer and the U.S. government's global democratization program. It's called National Endowment for Democracy. It's an instrument that pumps millions and millions of dollars out of the American taxpayers into the U.S. government's global democracy program. Many call the NED an overt CIA. How many Americans could identify the National Endowment for Democracy? An organization which often does exactly the opposite of what its name implies. The NED was set up in the early 1980s under President Reagan in the wake of all the negative revelations about the CIA in the second half of the 1970s. The latter was a remarkable period, spurred by Watergate, the Church Committee of the Senate, the Pike Committee of the House, and the Rockefeller Commission created by President Reagan were all busy investigating the CIA. Seemingly every other day, there was a new headline about the discovery of some awful thing, even criminal conduct the CIA had been mixed up in for years. The agency was getting an exceedingly bad name, and it was causing the powers that be much embarrassment. Something had to be done. What was done was not to stop doing these awful things. Of course not. What was done was to shift many of these awful things to a new organization with a nice-sounding name, the National Endowment for Democracy.
In the 1960s and 70s, there were many exposés of the CIA activities in various parts of the world. The CIA was caught doing some very embarrassing things for years. And it reached a point where it was so embarrassing that even members of Congress knew that something had to be done. And what they chose to do was not to end these embarrassing activities, but to found a new organization which would have a nice sounding name like National Endowment for Democracy. And this new organization, NED, would do the same things the CIA had been doing for years, but only they would do it a bit more openly, so that they couldn't be accused of covert activities. It would be a bit more open, but it would be essentially the same things. And that's how the NED was formed, and the reason it was formed in 1983.
But why do they call the National Endowment for Democracy the overt arm of the CIA? Alan Weinstein, who helped draft the legislation establishing the NED, was quite candid when he said in 1991, a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. And in fact, the CIA has been laundering money through NED. The idea was that the NED would do somewhat overtly what the CIA had been doing covertly for decades, and thus, hopefully, eliminate the stigma associated with CIA covert activities. Thus it was that in 1983, the National Endowment for Democracy was set up to, quote, support democratic institutions throughout the world.
NED speaks a lot about democracy, but they don't pursue it when there's a danger of the results being contrary to what Washington wants to see in any country.
We use highfalutin words that sound great, but really are not delivered, because you don't deliver democracy through violence. You deliver democracy through friendship, understanding, and the acceptance of the choices that other people make with respect to their governments. If they want to change their government, it's up to them. It's not up to us to tell other peoples what kind of government they should have.
The NED, like the CIA before it, calls what it does supporting democracy. The governments and movements whom the NED targets call it destabilization.
On the one hand, what American government means by democracy are governments that are in the same model as the United States, but more than that, the United States government wants systems around the world and governments around the world that are going to be subordinate to the United States. And the two are not the same, because the more democratic a society is, the more representative a government is in a country of the authentic interests of the people, the more that government will tend to be not subordinate to the United States, that more it will actually tend to be critical of the United States and seek an independent role from the United States.
In a multitude of ways, NED meddles in the internal affairs of foreign countries by supplying funds, technical know-how, training, educational materials, computers, fax machines, copiers, automobiles, and so on to selected political groups, civic organizations, labor unions, dissident movements, student groups, book publishers, newspapers, other media, etc. And now to follow the money, let's go straight to the official website of the National Endowment for Democracy and check out the transparency therein with regards to all the millions of dollars doled out to promote democracy around the world. The non-governmental part of the image is part of the myth. In actuality, virtually every penny of its funding comes from the federal government, as is clearly indicated in the financial statement in each issue of its annual report. National Endowment for Democracy likes to refer to itself as an NGO, that is a non-governmental organization, because this helps to maintain a certain credibility abroad that an official U.S. government agency might not have. But NGO is the wrong category. NED is a government organization, that is a GO.
NED would like the world to think that they are somehow an independent organization, like an NGO. But I say that they're actually a GO, a government organization. They are rarely, if ever, in strong opposition to the foreign policy of the U.S. You can go around the world from place to place and you'll see who NED is supporting and who they're against, and it coincides with the goals of U.S. foreign policy.
NED programs generally impart the basic philosophy that working people and other citizens are best served under a system of free enterprise, class cooperation, collective bargaining, minimal government intervention in the economy, and opposition to socialism in any shape or form. A free market economy is equated with democracy, reform, and growth, and the merits of foreign investment are emphasized.
The desire and the need for natural resources is, of course, a very important one, and also for markets around the world. That's also a very important aspect of this, and making sure that the rest of the world is going to be as favorable as possible for American financial interests.
From 1994 to 1996, NED awarded 15 grants totaling more than $2.5 million to American Institute for Free Labor Development, an organization used by the CIA for decades to subvert progressive labor unions. The endowment has funded centrist and rightist labor organizations to help them oppose those unions which are too militantly pro-worker. This has taken place in France, Portugal, and Spain, amongst many other places. In short, NED's programs are in sync with the basic needs and objectives of the New World Order's economic globalization, just as the programs have for years been in the same wavelength as U.S. foreign policy. So where there's an election, there's the National Endowment for Democracy with pockets full of dollars to help the pro-U.S. candidates that are almost always in the best interest of the voting nation.
There's many examples of this in Central America, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and in other countries where the United States has either secretly or even overtly has tried to influence elections and put its people in power, or at least to take out of power those leaders and those governments which it regards as hostile to its interests.
Under the guise of promoting free elections and so forth, United States has interfered in the domestic affairs of a number of countries around the world in order to secure the victory of, pro-Western politicians and candidates. And according to, many commentators, this is a subversion of the political sovereignty of these nations, and the United States has given itself the license to interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries in the name of promoting democracy.
NED successfully manipulated elections in Nicaragua back in 1990 and Mongolia in 1996, and helped to overthrow democratic elected governments in Bulgaria in 1990 and Albania in 1991 and 1992. In Haiti, in the late 1990s, NED was busy working on behalf of right-wing groups who were united in their opposition to former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide and his progressive ideology. NED has made its weight felt in the electoral political process in numerous other countries as well. NED would have the world believe that it's only teaching the ABCs of democracy and elections to people who do not know them. But in all 5 countries mentioned, there had already been free and fair elections held. The problem from NED's point of view is that the elections had been won by political parties not on NED's favorites list.
Often through elections, they would support or oppose governments in various countries, and they would put in a lot of money to help fight to fight in the election campaign. They would create various local organizations. They would train native people how to organize such activities, how to organize an election campaign. So there was a lot of education being done along those lines. But the purpose was always the same, to support a government favorable to the U.S. or to support an opposition that was favorable to the U.S.
To learn more about the colorful role of the National Endowment for Democracy when it comes to promoting democracy around the world, one only needs to look at the word color revolutions.
The NED has used the media extensively in the various countries they've operated in, either supporting existing media who share their views or creating new media to support their views. They've done this in all kinds of situations, and they have the money to fund new media. They can publish newspapers and support radio stations and TV stations. Money is not the question, and it's always hidden where the money is coming from. The people in the target country do not have any idea that the media they're being exposed to has any connection to the U.S. They think it's the native-grown media.
Help soften up the public in giving the impression that this government or that society is not only an adversary of the United States, but they're evil. They have to be overthrown. They're very bad.